Hi. For this particular video, what we're going to do is we're going to make our own Photoshop brushes. This is a very, very easy process, and you can make a Photoshop brush out of just about anything you want. Any black and white image can be turned into a new brush in Photoshop, and you can manipulate that brush to basically have all sorts of cool and interesting effects applied to them. As a case in point, one of the things that we just made in a previous project was this sphere, and what we're going to do is we're going to transform this actually into a Photoshop brush. Again, we just have kind of a black and white image here. So I'm going to go ahead and in this particular case, I'm just going to control click in the box here on that particular sphere layer. I'm going to do edit, copy, or you can do Control C. And then I'm going to make a new document. I've already made one. This one is just 512 by 512, 300 dpi, but just a white background to that. And if I hit Control V, it will paste my sphere in the box. Now obviously this is too big, so I'm going to do Control T, and that'll give me a transform tool, right? And I'll be able to just go ahead and size that down, right? And we'll zoom in a little bit here to get a better look. And we just kind of want it in bounds, and once we're done, we're going to hit enter. Now try not to transform your ball, your sphere too many times, because if you do, if you size it down and then size it back up, remember that this is a pixel program, so everything here is going to lose resolution. Okay, but what we do have is a black and white sphere, and we can use this, we can turn this into a brush. And the way that we do that is we just go up to edit, and we go to define brush preset, and then we'll call the preset sphere, and we'll say OK. And as you can see, my brush has turned into something that kind of looks like this sphere. So if I go back to the class blank and I do Control D to deselect, what happens if I make a new layer here? And let's take a nice red color here from our color picker, and you can see I now have this brush. Now it just looks like a brush, right? Nothing particularly special about it. But if I just create a new layer and I stamp the brush, you can see as I zoom in, yeah, look at that. I've got a sphere brush. Now the thing is that I can stamp with it, and that's fine maybe, but what if I want to make a string of pearls with this, let's say? Well, actually, that's fairly easy too. So one of the things that you would need to do, though, for that is you would need to get your brush settings out, right? So remember, if you don't see this little icon on your screen, go to Window, go to Brush Settings, and that'll create this. So there's a number of different things that you can do in brush settings to transform your brush. We won't go into all of them, but we'll go into a few that might make things a little bit more interesting. So the first and probably most useful thing that you'll find on here is under brush tip shape, you'll find spacing. And if I increase my spacing, you can see what happens to my brush, right? You can see that the brush is really just a series of stamps. And if I space it out far enough, I'll end up with sort of a string of pearls type configuration when I brush anything. Okay. Let's say though I would like the string of pearls to be bigger in the middle and smaller on the edges. Well, what I could do for that is I could turn on shape dynamics. So right under brush tip shape, you'll see shape dynamics. And you can do a whole bunch of different things. So for example, if you hit Control off here and you set it to pen pressure, that'll set it to the pen pressure of the stylus. So now when I draw. When I push down, my pearls get bigger. When I let up a little bit, my pearls get smaller, right? So that's kind of nice. What else can I do? If I don't want all of the pearls to be very uniform in size, I can turn on size jitter, and this basically makes it so that not every pearl, like it falls within a specific range of values, right? So not every pearl is going to be quite the same size. Okay, what else can I do? Let's undo that. Brush settings here. Okay, I can go to scattering. If I want to scatter something, right, you can see how that looks in my preview window down here. I can change the count of pearls. I can change the scatter of pearls very easily, right? So that's maybe where we were before. But if I do this, there we go. And you can see how something like this would be really handy for making something like bubbles, right? All I'm doing is just dragging the pen up and bubbles are appearing. Very easy. All right, so that's shape dynamics, that's scattering. There are other things you can do. You can create a texture brush, which means like you can add different textures. You can define your own textures, just like you can define your own brush. But say I want to have a texture added to my brush, I can add that in there. In this case I don't, I'm just going to take that off. But like if you wanted to have a brush and give it sort of a painted canvas texture when you're using it, texture is really good. Dual brush, same sort of thing, you can have a brush within a brush. Again, I don't often use a texture in dual brush. I like to try and keep a lot of my brushes simple. But if you are making your own brushes, you might want to experiment with some of those things. Another thing that you can do is color dynamics. And what you can do is, change the hue jitter, which again changes the hue range, and foreground background jitter. Foreground background is talking about these two colors, right? So if I want to change my my red here to sort of an orange color, and then I change my orange to maybe like light green, something hideous like this, right? This really terrible color combination. What I can do, you can see as I draw, you'll notice that some things are more than orange and some things are not quite green, but we got all sorts of different colors. And this is a really nice effect. Like maybe you want to make maybe you want to do something like create a crowd of people, right? You want a bunch of people's heads in a crowd, right? You could choose some more, maybe muted tones, something like this, right? And you could just draw. Now obviously you wouldn't want to use this brush, but you can get the general idea. You can make like a head brush, and then you could just make a little sea of heads, and that could be way off in the distance, something like that. Okay, so that's what color jitter does, or color dynamics. Another thing that you can do is you can turn transfer on. I would say that transfer is also like one of the most important brush settings to learn. Transfer means that if I go into my my AAA drawer, for example, you'll see that the edges not only taper here because of my shape dynamics, right? If I turn that off, see it's the same thickness all the way through. If I turn it on, it tapers at the ends. Transfer is kind of the difference between having an ink pen and a pencil, right? So if you're using a brush that has transfer on it, what's going to end up happening is you'll notice that that opacity sort of gets left behind a little bit. But if I take my transfer off, what you'll notice is nice, even values, right, throughout all of my pen strokes. All right, so let's get rid of this. Let's turn this back on. Now, if you notice with your brushes, if we go back up to brush tip shape, and we'll just stay on this very simple circle brush, right? Here's my circle brush. If you notice that you've got some of this wormy type look to the outside of your shape, and you don't like that texture on there, remember you can change that just by changing the spacing, right? Like that's an effect of the patterning of the brush. So if you reduce that spacing to 1%, that should take care of any issues that you might have. There we go. A nice brush shape with that. Also, don't forget with your brush settings, you can also flip your brush, tilt it. If you want something that's more like a calligraphy pen or something like that, you can get that kind of a look here too. So what's the best way to play around with your brushes? Just play around with them. Take a look at things, try things out, try and challenge yourself. Maybe try and challenge yourself to make something new. One of the brushes that I usually like to make to sort of show you how handy this is just a really simple like tree brush, right? So I can go, if I take my polygonal lasso tool, let's make a new layer in our little our brush document, right? So here is, I'm going to make a little pine tree. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect, right? And then I'm just going to fill this in. Very, very simple. And if I go over to Edit, Transform, I'm sorry, not Transform, Define Brush Preset. How about that? We'll call it Tree. We'll go OK. If we go back to our blank canvas here and we size our brush down, again, remember, we need to space this out. So let's make it like we've got trees dotting a mountainside and a cartoon, background, right? We can increase the spacing. We're going to go into Shape Dynamics. We'll do a size jitter, and we'll do pen pressure determines the size. By the way, you can also control right above roundness, I think. Yeah, we want direction. Let's try direction. You'll notice that the direction changes the orientation of the trees here. So let's try that. And we'll turn transfer on. Oh, and let's make them scatter a bit. Let's up the count and let's scatter them. And maybe we'll turn the count down. We'll keep it more around there. Okay. And then let's zoom out. Let's change our color to green. Maybe something that's not quite so garish. Something like that. And then, yeah, we can dot a landscape of trees. This would be really helpful, obviously, like if you wanted to have something that was a little bit more, if it's a little more cartoony, you can get away with something like this if you were to do like a landscape. Obviously, if you were using a photograph, a black and white photograph, and you turn that into your tree brush, which you can absolutely do, you want to be careful because sometimes some of that stuff ends up looking very repetitive and synthetic. So just be kind of careful with what you use and exactly how you are going to use it as a brush. Now, one other thing that I can do, actually, what I'm thinking a little bit of color jitter on this might be good. So let's make a new layer here. let's go back to my brush. Let's go to color dynamics, and let's do kind of a little bit of a lighter green for my new background color. So I've got kind of a darker and lighter green, and we'll do a hue jitter, foreground, background, and we'll do a little bit of saturation jitter to this, and let's see how this looks. If you have trees upside down, it's because when you draw this way, it'll draw upside down. That's an effect that has to do with my shape dynamics. Again, the control is direction. If I turn direction off, that won't be an issue. I can go backward or forward, and I can make my trees appear wherever I'd like. Okay, so you can see how really helpful these sorts of brushes are. There's plenty of brushes, obviously, that you can make for yourself. You can buy brushes online. Different people have played around with their brush settings to make some really interesting stuff. So, but this is the basics. This would be generally how you would make a brush. Remember, again, edit, define brush preset is how you're going to create that brush. Now, if you wanted to save this so that you didn't have to keep remaking this brush all of the time, there's a couple things that you could do. One thing is you could go into your tool presets, and you could just do a plus, and you can choose, do you want to create a brush preset? Yes, no, it doesn't really matter. And in these newer versions of Photoshop, a brush preset and a tool preset is basically the same sort of thing, right? So we'll just call this cartoon tree, and you can decide if you want to include what all you want to include, right? Do I want to capture the size of the brush, which is 150? Let's say yes. Do I want to include the tool settings? We'll say yes. Do I want to include the color? Sure. Now this time when I pull this out, I will have those exact greens that we had before, and we'll say okay. All right. What's the difference between this and just a regular old tree tool, right? The difference is you can see in my Photoshop brushes, right? This is part of the drop-down menu here. You can see the color is part of this. The brush settings is part of this. You can see everything here. Now if we go back to just our tree, what do we have? This again, right? So if we hadn't saved that preset, this is what we would be doing. We'd be stamping all of these trees onto this layer. All right, so we'll stop there. Just a short video on this, and then we'll get to work on another part of a project.